Here we have some tools, all of roughly the same kind, but they're different variations on a kind of unique sort of tool that goes under two names. One, they're called race knives, R-A-C-E, race knives, and the other are timber scribes. First, the simple race knife is an example here. It's simply a handle, a wooden handle connected through a steel blade that curves around and then has a sort of a real hoop-shaped cutting edge here. And what this is for taking a piece of wood and cutting a groove in it by drawing the knife across the wood, and it will make a groove in that wood. That groove is called a race. A race is in metalworking or woodworking is a groove in which something is held captive, and usually that something is a ball bearing. So if you have a ball bearing wheels on your bicycle or something like that, the ball bearings are encased in the race, which keeps them captive. And for wooden things, this is how you make a race, is with this particular knife. And typically in woodworking, and in particular in shipbuilding, which is where these things are used, the race is really used to cut a groove to mark a point to paint or not paint. So if you have a boat sitting in water and it's got a water line, you would get in a raft alongside that floating wooden hull and take your race knife and use it to make a groove right at the water line, right on around the boat. And then when the boat is taken out of the water and dries off, you can paint the bottom and paint the sides above and below that race line. So the race line is used as a marker to guide your painting of the boat. Now, this can also just be used to draw fancy things in wood or curved lines in wood. But the more complicated knife like this is what's called a timber scribe. This would be an example of a timber scribe. The timber scribe has the race knife portion, the looped over grooving knife, which by the way looks a lot like horse hoof cleaning knives. You've got to be careful that you can't separate a race knife from a hoof knife. But anyway, and then it has a second arm which has a prong at the bottom and sometimes a second grooved race knife. These are used typically to mark woods with curves or straight lines. So you could take and dip the point in and use it to stabilize it. I'm not doing this very well. And you cut a circle. You end up with a circle cut. And you can make that into anything you want. You can draw the letter A, an S, a U, any letter you want to put in the wood, any letter or number you want to put in the wood. And so these could be used to mark wood in very characteristic ways. So if you wanted to claim ownership of a board, for example, you could put your initials on it as it came off the sawmill. That's your board. Okay? If you're a cooper and you have to put staves around making a cask, and you get them all fitted in a certain order, then you can mark them with a race knife or a timber scribe to make the order clear, so that when you disassemble the cask, you can put it back in the same order in which you had originally made it. So the timber scribe is an important tool that way for shipbuilders, for coopers, and anywhere else you have to mark wood. And what we have here are a variety of timber scribes and race knives, and they come in lots of different fashions. I'll just mention a few of them here. Some of them have a second, this one has 3 knives and 1 point, and they're all fixed. Others of them have a movable one. So these have a one which will fold out of the way, another little knife that will fold out of the way. Some of them have 3 and 4, 4, 3, And then they're made of different woods. Here's one that's a very fancy one. It's made with an ivory or bone handle with a brass bottom to it. And if you looked at it very closely, you could see it's sort of all ornate woodworking or metalworking on here. So it's a really fancy little one. It's small, fancy little timber scribe. I'm sure this was made in France. French ones tend to be very, very ornate. Usually French tools are quite ornate. Some of them, these we're going back to race knives, some of them are folded. So you wouldn't want to carry a sharp knife in your pocket, so you can fold it up and put it in your pocket and carry it around with you. So the single ones are often folding. Here's one with a brass handle, and it too is folding. The ones that are kind of interesting to me here are this set of 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. They all look very similar and are like, as I showed you before, with a cutting knife with it. But this one has another arm here that just has 1, 2, 3, 4 spur-like points to it. And if we look here, here's another one which has 4 spur-like points, but they're different from each other, different distances apart. This one has 3 on each side, and this one has 2 very close together. And this one has, again, 3 which are different in their distances from each other. And what these were used for would be to drag across a piece of wood and score it with a pair of parallel lines in this case. How far apart the lines are, or how many of the lines are, would designate a particular race knife that made that. And so these are what we call customs inspectors' race knives. These were used by customs officials, in this case in France, to examine, let's say, imports of lumber coming in from a foreign port, and they would have to be examined by the customs officials to make sure they conform to the manifests on the ship and whatnot, to make sure there was no smuggling going on. And the inspector, having certified these, would mark them with his particular race knife. He would put his knife down that had 2 close together grooves, and that would mark that particular guy had okayed the shipment of lumber. So these go beyond the ordinary race knife or timber scribe by being customs inspectors, one in this case from France. And they're apparently quite unusual. I've got 5 of them here, and I've never seen any others. So they're kind of a special thing to have.